The sermon you are about to hear is a sermon that we should have heard about a week ago at 1910. But because we've had to shut back down, I'm preaching once again to you via YouTube. And this one is pretty special. This one was supposed to be live, obviously, and I've had to rethink it a little bit for a video sermon. I'm sitting next to a quilt that was handmade by Lorena Burnison. She's featured heavily in this sermon, and I thought I would just want you to know that before we go into this sermon. One hot afternoon in the summer of 1994, I put on my Dockers and my boots and my polo shirt because I wanted to look nice. Lonnie, one of my elders, gave me a list of 4 people in the Monday nursing home. He pointed at one of them and said, "Save her for last. You'll want to spend a little bit of extra time with her." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew pretty quickly what that would mean. Friday afternoons for years, I would walk over to the Monday nursing home. That first time, I went and saw Alma and Chancey, one other person, and then I went and saw Lorena. Ecclesiastes 10 actually begins in 9:17 with a string of proverbs. It gets to one of the final sections. The 9:17 actually gets what I think is the final section of Ecclesiastes going. These last words, these final bits of wisdom for the long road ahead. Ecclesiastes 9:17. The quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Talk about a proverb that could have been written yesterday. The first time I walked into Lorena's room at the Monday nursing home, I was 22 and she was 81. She didn't know me. I didn't know her. I walked in the door. I said, "Are you Miss Burnison?" And she said, "Nope, I'm just Lorena." And I said, "Well, I'm Jeff. I'm the new preacher at the Monday Church of Christ." Her face lit up, her eyes especially, which I'll tell you about. And she welcomed me to sit down, and we started talking, and we built a relationship. She talked about how hard her life was, but that there were little things that made it worthwhile. Kind of the opposite of Ecclesiastes 10:1. Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a foul odor, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. Now again, bear in mind, this is wisdom literature. This is not book, chapter, and verse truth for all time. It's an observation. A lot of times it's true, a lot of times it may not be, depending on the situation. And I think Lorena might beg to differ with this one, because she approached life differently toward the end of her life, and she told me as such. The kingdom of heaven is sometimes like seeing the world through a lens of folly. And it's easy to do it, especially these days. And when I say especially these days, you could say that any time in history. Yes, the times we are going through are hard, but we're not the first generation of people to ever go through hard times. So, yeah, you can see the world through folly. But sometimes the kingdom of heaven is like looking through very thick glasses and seeing wisdom, seeing what is good. This is what Jesus' kingdom parables are about in the entirety of the kingdom parable section of Matthew 13. Like Proverbs, these are stories that are meant for all time with our specific time in mind today. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. I think Lorena found the treasure in the field. Somewhere along the way, she found it. And then she started passing out pieces of it, including passing out pieces of her wisdom to 22-year-old preachers. She lived in Monday all her life. 2 of our church members were schoolmates of hers, all 3 of them born, raised, and spending their entire lives in Monday, Texas. Lorena, Lonnie, the elder that I mentioned earlier that told me to go see Lorena, and Elvis. You may remember, by the way, if you've ever heard me talk about Elvis, that Elvis was a woman who was about as subtle as a train wreck. Lorena's eyes, they did something whenever I mentioned that I had gone to see Elvis and Grady, Elvis's husband. Her eyes were enormous because of the glasses that she wore. She had these Coke bottle glasses, and so her eyes felt like they were 2 inches across. The day I met Lorena, she asked me how I was like living in Monday, and I said it was good, that we were adjusting nicely, and I really liked it. She asked me who all I'd gone to visit, and for some reason I mentioned that I had gone to see Elvis. Lorena didn't say a word, but she rolled her eyes, her giant eyes through her thick glasses, and then she said, "Well, let me tell you, little preacher, you got to take that one with a block of salt." And then she bust out laughing. She, Lonnie, and Elvis liked little sayings, little proverb sayings. It was kind of a West Texas thing. And I think she would have liked Ecclesiastes 10:15. "The toil of fools wears them out, for they do not even know the way to town." I think Lorena found her way to town. Somewhere along the way, she found it. And then she started inviting people to come to town with her, including journeyman 22-year-old preachers. Ecclesiastes 10 bleeds into chapter 11 with its little proverbs, including a rather interesting one that I don't think means what we think it means. Ecclesiastes 11:2, "Divide your means 7 ways, or even 8, for you do not know what disaster may happen on earth." Now, you might hear that and think that the preacher is talking about diversifying your portfolio. I don't think this is an investment strategy, mainly because of its connection to the proverb right before it. No, this is one about sharing, as simple as sharing, and living a life connected to other people, like the earlier ideas of Ecclesiastes, about living being connected to hope, like the remembrance that there is a time for everything. And the proverb right before, "divide your means," is actually familiar to some. And it shows up in popular culture even from time to time. "Send your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will get it back." Not too long after I had been walking over to the Monday nursing home every Friday afternoon after lunch, one day I walked in and they had just served Lorena her lunch. She said, right as I walked in, "Land of Goshen, Jeff, they just now brung me my dinner." I told her it was not a problem. Just go ahead and eat. She wasn't going to bother me a bit. She didn't have any control over the fact that they were late with her lunch that day. But then she looked at me with her giant eyes and total sincerity and said, "Well, I'll divide with you." I told her that I'd just eaten lunch, but go right ahead. No worries. But for the next few years, until the weeks when she could no longer get out of bed, right before she died, over those next few years, on the occasion when she still had food in front of her, which happened from time to time, when I arrived and she had a meal before her, she always said the same thing. It feels appropriate that right now, while we are once again away from 1910, that the old tablecloth that she made by hand is sitting on our communion table at 1910 right now. You may have noticed it last week during the sermon that I preached, getting us back going with Living Room Church and Zoom Church. She made that with her own two hands. And she told me that she made it while she was praying. Our God sets a table before us today in the presence of our enemies. Our cup is running over. It is so full. And our calling as the people of God, as the people of Jesus, as we sit at the table that God sets before us, our calling is to look at everyone at the table, our friends, our loved ones, our enemies, everyone in between. We all gather around the table and we say the same thing to every person at the table. I'll divide with you. Sometimes these little proverbs remind us that we are not alone, that we have a common language that we share, even if it sounds like something that we've already heard before. It's like an old voice that you haven't heard in a while, talking to you from the past, reminding you that God is with us. Remember that one? Well, if you don't, and if you need someone to share God, I'll divide with you.